In this video, I will be discussing secular morality, specifically its fundamental assumptions and why it fails to provide a workable moral system as recognized by most of us. To start off, we will look at how secular morality arrives at conclusions as laid out by Michael Shermer.
The question is faith compatible with reason? What do you mean by these words? The traditional definition of faith is belief without sufficient reason or justification. If faith is believing without reason, then it can't possibly be compatible with reason. This is like asking, is blindness compatible with vision? No. Is hearing compatible with deafness? No. Or appropriate for Freedom Fest, is slavery compatible with freedom? No, it isn't. This is a contradiction in terms. Faith may generate belief. You may, through introspection or off the top of your head or talking to your friends or whatever, just accidentally come up with some belief that happens to be true, but that's not a justification for the belief. So to say, I know it by faith, is literally an oxymoron. Knowledge comes through reason. So faith-based knowledge is an oxymoron. It doesn't exist. Now here I'm including empirical evidence in the whole package of reason. So I'm including science. I usually say science and reason, or science and or reason and empiricism, something like that. How do we know that science and reason works? Because it works. You can cure diseases with it. You can send a Tesla model roadster to Mars, or wherever it's going. Or what I call the witch theory of causality in my book, The Moral Arc. I talk about how moral progress is made in the same way that these other problems are solved, is applying science and reason. When people thought that the causal explanation of diseases and accidents and plagues and famines and so on were women cavorting with demons in the middle of the night, they were wrong. And therefore, their application of their causal theory to burning women at the stake as a solution was wrong. So we solved that problem, and we don't have to go back. And that's how science and reason are tools that lead toward all kinds of progress. Just call it human progress, but in the Moral Arc I talked about moral progress.
Michael makes two assertions here. The first being that all knowledge is exclusively arrived at through reason, and the second being that scientific advancements are perfectly analogous to moral advancements. I will address the second assertion first. Using the example he provided, he says that in order to eradicate disease, one must properly identify its cause. This is true, however, it isn't a moral statement. Getting rid of disease is only a good thing, meaning morally correct, if it serves a moral goal. In the case of disease, getting rid of it is a good thing because it causes suffering and death, not simply because science has found a way to get rid of it. This may seem straightforward enough, but science can only solve problems that we've identified as problems. And the process of identifying something as a problem is not a scientific one, but a philosophical one. Science can inform us about the nature of a problem, but our decision to see something as a problem in itself is because of shared moral values, not because of the scientific method. Science is a methodology. It is a means to get somewhere, not an end. Morality is concerned with ends. In other words, science is concerned with the question of how, whereas morality is concerned with why. For example, the invention of machine guns is not inherently bad, even though it makes it easier to commit violence. The reason why weapons aren't a hindrance to moral progress is because the proper use of weapons is for self-preservation. The very reason why weapons are not a step backwards in moral progress has nothing to do with the science that led to its creation, but has everything to do with the separate moral question of how it is used. Now that we've established that morality doesn't come from science, the next assumption to tackle is that everything can be determined through reason or rationality. Now, I'm not saying that reason should never be used, but what I am saying is that morality is not perfectly rational, and as I'm about to show you, is predicated on some very irrational notions. To set this up, I will show you a clip from a debate where the atheist Matt Dillahunty makes a case for the rationality of choosing to be alive over being dead.
However we're going to define well-being, which is, I say you can start with a couple of foundations. You could start with death is preferable to life, but you don't get very far that way. And
Stop suffering.
Well, no, I'm saying you could start with death is preferable to life, but you don't get very far that way because those
You do. You stop suffering. You just die.
Yes.
Right, so you can start with the presupposition.
Except that when you're dead, you're not being, so there's no well-being.
No, well, that's... That's not necessarily the case.
If we're looking for the best things about our life, you can't say death is better.
Yeah, you can.
Well, I know that you can say it.
People do all the time. They do. No, look.
They can express their preference, but their
this.
preference can be wrong. How can it possibly be better for your life if you're dead?
What if you, are a terminal burn victim with cancer?
So this is the point that I was getting to. I am perfectly fine with the idea that for certain instances, there may be occasions that death is preferable to an individual over life. But when we're speaking in broader terms, if we're talking about let's create the best society we can, let's create the best quality of life we can for people, death is not that across the board. That doesn't mean that there aren't individual exceptions.
Matt's argument is that it isn't good for well-being to be dead, because there is no well-being when there is no being. When Jordan questions whether life should always be preserved, even in cases where being alive doesn't preserve well-being, Matt says that there are exceptions to this rule. Implicit in Matt's argument is that a state of well-being is superior to no being, and that no being is superior to being and suffering. This, however, isn't true. If death means that there is no being, there is also no need for well-being. When we aren't conscious, such as when we're in deep sleep, we don't experience pleasure, but we also don't need pleasure. We simply are. And since there is no pain either, there is no reason to believe that not being alive is any better or worse than being alive, no matter how pleasurable the life is. This would mean that if I kill someone, the murder would be a neutral action, since being dead isn't worse for their well-being than being alive. So even something as fundamental as preserving life isn't something that can be rationally arrived at from the principle of well-being. In the same debate, Jordan says that the reason Matt wouldn't hypothetically throw someone off the stage is because that person has intrinsic value.
Because you regard Sam Harris as an implicitly valuable entity. Because otherwise you'd just throw him off the stage. And then the question is, well, just exactly why is he an implicitly valuable entity? What's your metaphysics of that?
I don't think he's implicitly valuable in the sense, I don't think he's implicitly valuable in the sense that the universe has implied that there's something explicit about it.
Matt then counters this by explaining that the reason he wouldn't throw Sam off the stage is because he himself would prefer not to be thrown off the stage, and so it is in his best interest to encourage this behavior in others.
I think you can have a perfectly acceptable foundation for secular morality, even if it fundamentally centers around selfishness. I'd rather not be thrown off the stage. It's in my best interest to encourage that sort of understanding in others, and therefore I will not throw him off the stage. I would rather not have my stuff stolen, and it's in my best interest to encourage others not to do that, so I will not steal stuff, and I will work with others to ensure that the people who steal stuff are punished. It is in a virtually pragmatic moral system.
Why do you think
Matt's argument is that selfishness can work out for the greater good because what I want for myself, which is presumably the same amongst most people, is best attained by extending that same courtesy to others. Therefore, if I want X, I should allow for other people to be entitled to X, such that it doesn't backfire and I end up losing X. This is a limited view of selfishness. Dictators such as Hitler, for instance, play the game of reciprocation insofar as they can use it to gain all of the political power. Once in charge, they then do whatever they want, and they no longer have to reciprocate in order to get what they want. Selfishness only benefits others if I need to please them to gain what I want. If I have a group of loyal henchmen who will enforce whatever I say, then there is nothing I can't do without consequence. This touches on the topic of human rights, because the reason that we consider it to be an offense to be thrown off the stage or stolen from is because we feel entitled to our body and property. But where does this entitlement come from? Selfishness doesn't guarantee it, but does anything guarantee that we are entitled to what we have other than the belief that we do? Traditionally, these rights were said to come from God, such as the Declaration of Independence, which declares that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I don't have a definitive answer to this question, but it is worth thinking about. A lot of what we take to be morally granted are actually irrational notions that may very well have their roots in irrational traditions, such as religion. That is all for now. Thank you for watching.